I'm with the Ecosystem Center of the Marine Biological Laboratory. My first job is to tell you that this is being recorded, so if you don't like that, I guess you have to leave. And the second thing is, please make sure that you've silenced your cell phone. This is our final Friday evening lecture of the year. We'd like to thank everybody who's helped make these possible, all of the generous donors that have done that. Tonight, I'm really pleased to be introducing Paula Mabee. Paula is the chief scientist and the observatory director at Neon, which is the National Ecological Observatory Network. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Paula's background and then say a few more words about Neon. Paula's research is focused on the connections between developmental and evolutionary biology in the context of phylogenetic systematics. Much of her work has been on fish, ranging from zebrafish to paddlefish. Paula got her start at Duke University, and then after that she went and did 2 postdocs, one at the Smithsonian, where she, I think, acquired her love of fish, and the second one at Dalhousie before she took a professorship at San Diego. After that, she moved to the University of South Dakota, where she spent the bulk of her career. However, for 2 years, she was the National Science Foundation Division Director for the Division of Environmental Biology. And at NSF, she launched a lot of new initiatives, which I think have really set her up well for her current position. She supported new opportunities for international collaboration of ecologists, ecosystem scientists, population geneticists, and evolutionary and systematic biologists, and she was heavily involved in the founding of the Rules of Life program at NSF. So I got to know Paula because I serve on the Neon Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee. I want to say that Paula took over during some incredibly challenging times. Neon had transitioned from building this massive observatory, so it was like a construction project, into operations. With those kind of changes and for other reasons, there was a lot of turnover of staff. There was all sorts of difficulties. At the same time, the community was getting a little bit anxious. Neon had supposed to have come online a little bit earlier, and there was a lot of worry that Neon just wasn't succeed and wasn't going to do what it was supposed to do, take a lot of money and not fulfill its scientific potential. And in the midst of all this, 3 months after Paula started, of course, everything shut down with COVID. So I can't imagine a more difficult set of circumstances, but I think Paula has certainly risen to that with her leadership. I think Neon's on a stable footing. Although she wasn't trained as an ecologist, her broad interest in understanding how gene regulation and traits change with environmental shifts allowed her to really connect with the environmental community and allowed them maybe to think of Neon in a bigger, more collaborative way. So she actively engaged the scientific and ecological communities and built some critical partnership. Paula has a long list of honors. What she said is the one she's most proud of is the Joseph S. Nelson Lifetime Achievement Award in Ichthyology, and that's awarded by the American Society of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists. She's also a AAAS Fellow, and she was named a NOLLUP Distinguished Professor of Biology at University of South Dakota. Other awards at University of South Dakota include the Cutler Award in Liberal Arts, the President's Award for Research Excellence, and the President's Award for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So really pleased to have you here tonight, Paula, and would everyone join me in welcoming her here.
did it. So good evening. So that was a short of a video that we made for the Ecological Society of America meeting last week, and it expresses the momentum and energy of Neon. So I thought I would start with that. So I want to first thank the organizers, Nipam, Anne, and Linda, for the invitation to speak. I'm very honored to be here and excited to give this talk in person, which is a rare treat. And I want to say hello to the virtual audience. You are right there, because I think I know some of you who are online watching. So welcome to everyone, and again, I'm really pleased to be here. So I want to start with a question, which is, what is an observatory? So most people think of an observatory as a building with one impressively large and expensive instrument pointed at the sky. But what if your observatory is not a big thing pointed at the sky? The Neon Observatory is almost the complete opposite. So Neon is a distributed observatory and a network strategically positioned across 81 different sites across the US, ranging from the Arctic, the North Slope of Alaska, to the Caribbean island of Puerto Rico. These sites span about a quarter of the longitudes and latitudes of our planet and represent the full spectrum of ecoclimatic domains in the United States, and there are about 20. Instead of one instrument to maintain, then, we have 11,000 sensors across our sites and about 400 scientists in the field, collecting over 180 data products. So this creates a really different organizational structure. Requires amazing coordination, planning, scheduling, hiring, maintenance, et cetera. So we're charged with collecting this data for 30 years, long-term data required by the job, making it freely and openly available for anyone and promoting its use. So NEON is a large facility of the National Science Foundation, funded by the Directorate of Biological Sciences across all of its divisions, from molecular biology, that I knew Linda from, to environmental biology, which is a division that I headed. So it's an integrative and integrated concept. In my talk tonight, I'll be telling you about the ambitious underpinnings involved in running this spatially distributed type of observatory and the science that it enables. So this is a slide that I wanted to show you that basically describes the 81 sites across the United States, 181 data products, and 30 years of data. So before talking more about the data and the science that NEON enables, I'd like to take you on a little walk around NEON. And you'll see how we collect data using automated sensor systems or instrument systems, observational field sampling, and airborne observation platform. So move to this little walk around the observatory right now. And we'll begin with our instrumented systems. So NEON has iconic towers at each terrestrial field site, equipped with sensors at all different levels that measure different aspects of the atmosphere, and like barometric pressure and CO2 flux. From the tower top, we can see plots and grids for other kinds of ground measurements laid out near the tower. And just as one example, our soil arrays and through-fall instruments collect data that can be used to study heat flux, precipitation, nitrogen pools, and a lot more. Our aquatic sites are also fully instrumented. So sensors and gauges at these sites collect data on freshwater ecosystems from streams to larger lakes. At nearly all of our sites, you'll also find cameras like this one, which captures the actual footage every 15 minutes and captures seasonal changes called phenology. This is a phenocam. There are lots of other instruments in our systems, too many to really capture in this video. In addition to permanent sites, we also have mobile sites that researchers like you in the audience can request as part of their grant proposals to use in a unique location, such as the MBL. You could put one right out here. They're what we call part of our assignable assets program. So now I'm going to take you to do a little field work. So this is what people traditionally think of when they think of ecology fieldwork. Our staff are trained in standardized protocols to collect samples and data from a vast array of our different field sites and ecosystems across the continent. So nearly 600 people are involved in NEON, hired by NEON, and about 200 are temporary field staff who do the seasonal field work, of course, along with NEON field staff. So this is a diverse group, the seasonal field workers, of people often finishing or just finishing their undergrad degrees and from all over the country. About a third of these people return to Neon because they love it, like any field station. So they're involved in very precisely scheduled work, and they return to the lab in the headquarters of each domain, so we have 20, to conduct any necessary lab work or analysis. Many of the samples are then sent directly to the Neon Biorepository in Arizona. Others, like beetle specimens, are shipped out for expert taxonomic or genomic analysis. And the original collection data and any of these other new data are linked together then in the data pipeline with those samples. Researchers can easily collect these, request these samples. So along with our infrastructure and observation, we have airborne observation platform. And by that, I really do mean that we have planes equipped with instrument payloads to collect ecological data from the sky. So this twin Otter aircraft are designed to fly low and slow, which allows the collection of high-quality data like hyperspectral imagery, LiDAR data, and camera imagery. The Neon airborne sensor operators, who are full-time Neon staff, run these instruments. You're looking at them and carefully look at the data as they're being collected. So this is a form of remote sensing. We can generate images like this one that have incredibly high-resolution data of the ground cover, canopy, and all the vegetation. And we schedule our flights across the country to collect during peak greenness, which is what it sounds to be. So remember that as this remote sensing is happening, below you, beetles are being collected by our field staff, stream invertebrates are being sampled, and the instruments are picking up a world of data of their own. So Neon data are checked then for quality using a computer called a hotel kit. This is the airborne data, and processed, made available to researchers through the Neon website. So this is the end of your in-person tour. Okay, so on the walkabout, you saw what the observatory was and what we do, but what is it for? So Neon is designed to basically address the grand challenge questions, including some of the really important ones of our time. So these include climate change, land use, invasive species, and the responses to those change reflected in some of the data products that we capture: biogeochemical, biodiversity, ecohydrology, and infectious diseases. So these interact with one another. The IPCC report that was released this past week underscored once again what a dire position we're putting our planet in. But it's not too late. So our scientific community is better prepared than any other time to think creatively and quickly about how to use data, including Neon's very important and targeted data, to basically prepare the analog of a messenger RNA vaccine for our planet. So wouldn't that be great? We can do this. So Neon enables a number of different things. It enables analyses by virtue of these free and open data and samples, comparisons across a standardized and reliable framework for research and experiments, and interoperability by virtue of those standards, integrating with other national and international science efforts. And I'll give you a couple of examples of those. So this is a really, really important key piece of this observatory. So I'd like to talk first about standards. The concept of this observatory as a distributed network required standardization at a scale not ever attempted in an ecological community anywhere. It was important to standardize what was being collected, how it was being collected, units in which it's measured or expressed, calibration methods, algorithms, and what constitutes high-quality data. So everything had to be figured out there. And standardization might be an underrated concept or something that you are thinking, oh boy, this is going to be tedious, but it's actually quite profound. So standards enable our modern world, and they're given by very grand thinking, big scope thinking. And I've got two examples. I think there are probably many more. So Carl Linnaeus, botanist and father of taxonomy, his vision was to systematize the entire diversity of life on the planet into a single hierarchical taxonomic system that we still use today that enables the sophisticated evolutionary analyses that are incredibly informative when it comes to integrating evolution and ecology. This is just one of thousands of published maps of the relationship of life on our planet. Another example is the introductions of railroads to span the United States at an unprecedented scale. I mean, it's almost an unimaginable kind of thing to plan, right? And it forced the standardization of something unlikely, makes sense in retrospect, the standardization of time and the invention of time zones in the US. So this is the first map published showing those time zones in the US. It was published by the railroads. Before that, time was a local matter, but the scale and the practical requirement to predict when a train arrived required the standardization, and something that we take for granted, even though it enables global communications, travel, and precision to get on our Zoom calls on time. So it took many years, but eventually people around the world adopted the time zone concept, and it's what we have today. When I've talked with Neon scientists about development of standards, they pointed out that it's often not appreciated just how difficult it is to standardize. So traditionally, researchers have used methods, developed methods that are best suited for the research questions for their own study in local conditions. That makes sense. But field sampling across the US was a unique challenge. You need to have one standard protocol across all these different habitats, enough to accommodate tundra in Alaska and the forests of Puerto Rico. So if you explode this across the entire range of data products that we collect, and the need to monitor continuously and to maintain quality, you have a really tall order, and for 30 years. So you have to adapt, yet keep the protocol the same. An example of this comes from the stream macroinvertebrate sampling protocol, which is a lot of words, but it's basically the little insects that live on the bottom of streams that are really important for fly fisher people to understand. So this is the protocol right there, multiple pages long, developed by Neon, freely available on the website. It was adapted initially from the USGS and EPA, extended spatially for sampling up and down the stream. Look great, but then the trees fall down, and then the stream dries up. So how do you handle the protocol, and how do you adapt then? So you need to be as standardized as possible, but it's hard. Neon biologists are rigorously trained. We have internal training programs, but they're people, and they make those choices on the fly with one thing in mind, which is what is the best for the science? What is the best for the scientists who will use these data? And believe me, these are really, really committed scientists in the field. So could a robot do this? I had to ask myself during COVID, at the risk of being offensive. And I was convinced that for many of those protocols, you have to have a human being. But maybe with emerging technology, and we keep our eye on that, we'll be able to adapt some things for other types of protocols. So one thing that's really cool is that Neon protocols are in demand by researchers at this point. So that's cool, because if other people are using the same protocols, it makes comparison with the Neon data very, very easy. And this aquatic macroinvertebrate sampling protocol is being used by an NSF-funded investigator to ask questions like, how does drying act as a control on stream ecosystem structure and function, and how are intermittent, meaning drying up, and perennial streams different? Apparently, intermittent streams are about half of the streams on the planet. So this person is using that protocol for their streams and using Neon streams as comparisons and additional data types. So that's the beginning of the spread of something that could come as spatially distributed as the railroad. As I mentioned, we are part of national and international networks that share standards. So sometimes people say that standards are like toothbrushes, so everybody needs one, but no one wants to share. And Neon took the sharing approach, that's best practices. So we adopted standards that allowed the digital time-lapse images of our phenocams, which you saw in the video on your tour, to be integrated into the phenocam network, which has 30 million images. And this, by adopting their standards, It enabled total interoperability, meaning like total, one person can take all those images and study them easily together, and doubled the size and power of the data set for all researchers, filled all sorts of key gaps in the landscape. 81 sites, the size of the US, isn't enough to cover the landscape. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see these phenocams. One pointed looking at the snow cover in the winter, the other not. And again, these are images that are captured every 15 minutes and loaded almost instantly to that phenocam network. And then just a quick image here. As with phenocam, the eddy flux covariance data, which reflects the movements of CO2 and water between the Earth and the atmosphere, are shared with a big network called Ameriflux, which through cross-network collaboration moves that data. So our data go into Ameriflux, Ameriflux moves it to FluxNet, which is a global network, which is exactly what is important to understand our planetary ecosystem issues and make progress. So the interoperability of these widely used data is key to forecasting for the planet. Okay, little interlude here. Speaker guidelines said I should talk about my background. So you heard a little from Anne. So data interoperability has actually been a very big focus of my career for the past 15 years. So I've always been very, very interested in biodiversity, the way any child is. There are amazing things out there. These are all sorts of catfish. And you can see all the doodads on their mouths and spines and colors. And I mean, that's all part of the novelty of every species. So the question I've had in my mind for a long time is how does that novelty become generated genetically and through development? And that's a really hard question to answer for organisms that aren't part of model organisms. So model organisms, like the mouse and the zebrafish and the fruit fly, have been incredibly powerful examples and places that we've learned a huge amount, the most, about the genome. In this example, I've called myself Translational Biodiversity because what we know is that all these organisms have eyes, and that if you take out of the genome the same gene, which has different names, but take it out and you have eyes that lose some part of their vision. And so logically, one would then wonder, if you've got a cave catfish who's lost its eye, and all the other catfish have an eye, could that gene have anything to do with it? And that's parsimony for you. Everybody thinks, well, yeah, of course. Maybe that's a good candidate gene. And so that's neat, except that to find that, if you work on fish like this, you have to dig through the literature. Except that each of these different models had a database. So this led to me working with the fish people, the zebrafish people, to try to connect these data by extending the standards, essentially, ontologies for biodiversity, beginning with fish, to be the same standards, or basically connect with those of model organisms. And so what that means is, given that their databases connect genes to traits or observed features, this is experimental work, and our data are all about species that have all these crazy things, you can then reason from a species and its trait to a gene. So very simple. So the NSF award that I got to do this, it worked in, I think, 6 months. And then everything else was really hard for 15 years, the way science is. But basically, it's very possible to link species traits to candidate genes. And the fun thing about this is that through the years, I've watched applications. So standards create new opportunities. They create opportunities to do trait mapping, forward genetics, all kinds of interesting visualizations. And they also connect with environmental data. So those observable features of species are obviously connected to genes, as I just mentioned, but they're the product of environment and genes, as we all know. All biologists know that. And so you have to somehow link the environment into that data to really fully understand how traits are changing. Traits like flowering time, which our phenocams capture. And all of this, I put evolution in the back because evolution is this, the backdrop against which our planet is set. Okay, so changing back to Neon. These are Neon data. They live in computers like the ones you see here, and they provision researchers with what they need to just improve our fundamental understanding of ecosystems. And I want to talk a little bit about the characteristics of Neon data. So Neon data are very importantly and very critically long-term. But what is long-term? So Earth's a dynamic planet, and it has an ecosystem. We don't know any others that do. We live here, where change occurs at least 3 or 4 different timescales, probably more. So there's geological change on the order of billions and millions of years, and that applies to tectonic plates. And at the opposite end of the timescales, we have atmospheric changes that occur daily, which we think of as weather and climate. And it's at this level that data have been collected for a very long time, and that's how we know so well that our climate is changing, that the average temperature of the Earth is changing. But in between these extremes, we have timescales of evolution, biological change, evolution, and ecological change. So ecological change occurs at a faster timescale than evolutionary change, and we can measure it during our lifetimes. Ecological features of the environment have not been followed in a systematic and standardized way anywhere. And although there are excellent local records, as I mentioned before, for example, those from the LTER, they're difficult to connect to one another because the data aren't easily, because different data are collected and variable sampling methods. So Neon answers this call for long-term data at the appropriate ecological timescale of decades, 30 years, 3 decades, and these enabled prediction. So an example of the need for long-term data comes from some long-term changes that we'd like to know about in populations of disease vectors under the scenario, which we're living out right now, of climate change. So we want to evaluate and predict disease risk. Neon collects population-level data for mosquitoes, ticks, and small mammals. Though we only have been in full operations at all of our sites for 2 years, these researchers have used Neon tick data along with Neon vegetation data and atmospheric data like precipitation, humidity, et cetera, to develop a model that predicts where ticks will be and how many of them might be there to estimate disease risk. So this model can be tested over the long-term data that Neon produces. Neon data are pretty big. So when it comes to data, size isn't everything. Neon collects about 600 terabytes per year of raw data, which is equivalent to about a month's worth of data from the astronomical Rubin Observatory, which will be in operation next year. So that's about, as I said, 1 month of their data. So what does that mean? Well, terabytes is only one way of expressing Neon data. So you remember the different systems. So instrumented systems bring in data from 11,000 sensors mounted on towers, land, and water. They account for about only 10 terabytes of the 600, but the data points are coming at a very high rate and lots of them. So 5.6 billion data points per day. So this is directly analogous to Visa. So the volume of transactions are the challenge for Visa, but VisaNet handles 1,700 transactions a second only. So it's an average of 150 million transactions each day, and again, that's an order of magnitude less than Neon. So that's a data challenge that's not connected to size. The observational system, so people on the ground, 400 of the 600 people are on the ground collecting biological data, are so small that it's, maybe a terabyte. It's just insignificant. But because it's collected manually, and because of the pipelines connected, where you connect taxonomic data, genetic data, et cetera, to these species, it's really a lot of complex cyber infrastructure to connect all that information over time. Data from the airborne platform make up most of the 600 terabytes per year. So they're so big that it's actually a challenge for researchers to get to them if they want them raw, which very few investigators do. I'm happy to tell you that Neon data transfer just started to the cloud. So we have about 400 terabytes moved currently, started a couple weeks ago. And we expect it to continue for a couple of months due to the size of Neon data. So Neon data are very fair. So fair refers to findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And those roll off the tongue of people involved in data. So findable means that people are aware of them, right? And that if they look for them, like you all will be after this talk, you can find them online. Accessible means not only can you find them, but you can get them, you can download them, and hopefully you can do something with them. That's another part of accessible that's hard. Not just with Neon data, but all data. Interoperable, I've just talked about, use the same standards, or if you cross-reference your standards, you can share data and study data almost seamlessly. And then reusable means that somewhere you can find a data set that someone's analyzed and go back and analyze it and find the same thing, or test it. I put this in here because we can't forget that Neon collects samples, and Neon samples are also fair. So Neon collects about 100,000 specimens and samples each year that are sent to the Neon Biorepository, which is at Arizona State University. So on the left is a list of the organisms that Neon collects, some pictures here. These data, because they all end up in, there are samples that are samples, but there's data for all these samples, go to global resources like GBIF or Barcode of Life. So again, shared globally and mixed with data using the same kinds of standards. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about research. So good science, Neon scientists, of which we have about 70, master's and PhD level scientists working at Neon, not doing research, but minding the data and the quality of the data and how it's collected and how people are trained. And it takes this. So good science is built on good data, but it's also built on creativity that researchers bring to Neon data. So the goal that we have is for these data to be used by scientists working together across disciplines to meet the challenges of our time, because that's what it's going to take, like climate change, clean energy, curing disease. And these publications happily represent some very different fields, if you can see them from there. So computational journals like remote sensing, forest ecology, and a number of others there. Although we're only halfway through 2021, you can see that the number of publications that use Neon data, so this is a very refined set of papers here, has risen. So people are using these data, and we're very happy about that. There's so much potential in Neon to address these long-standing questions. So then, what are Neon data being used for right now? And I think what we see is a number of papers using field-based data, so the stuff that people are collecting on the ground, like those macroinvertebrates and vegetation, to ground truth remote sensing data, so linking those data. And you saw that also with the tick data, some linked data. And one very important question and method, actually, I would say, that people are interested in is, how can you predict forest composition by flying over it? Because getting on the ground and counting what type of trees you have is critical to forestry management, and we have a lot of national parks and forests, and a lot of wildfires burning. Wouldn't it be great if you could use remote sensing to actually do that? So this is the world of the future, and maybe not a very distant future. So we're trying to train these researchers, and others are trying to train machines to do this, and they're using Neon's on-the-ground measurements of individual trees. So you see that on the left there. So these are some Neon folks who are measuring the diameter of the tree and various things about the vegetation, including the identification of the tree. And then this blurry thing here is basically different versions of the flyover with different polygons associated with these trees. And because of this ground truth data here, the predictions that are made by the machine learning, can be tested. So simply connecting those data types from remote sensing to the field is really, really important in developing new tools using machine learning, artificial intelligence, et cetera, to help do things that sound pretty simple, maybe, like let's just identify our trees as we fly over them, but it's very, very hard and of course isn't worked out at all. So we're contributing to these open, reproducible tools that people are making in the Neon user community. This is just actually another example of the same thing. Some of these AOP data, the airborne data, sorry about the abbreviation, for machine learning-based species identification. Same problem. How can we identify these trees from the air? Different methods, but connecting these different data types. This one's a bit different. This connects to biodiversity. We don't want to lose our biodiversity, and we're rapidly losing our biodiversity. So the extinction rates are way too high. And of course, Neon data will be used to study and protect biodiversity. So remote sensing data can inform us about that diversity if we can, again, get our little computer helpers to work with us using the right algorithms. So in this study, the richness of animal diversity was studied using improvements in LiDAR technologies that enable researchers to basically look at the 3D structure of the forest. So there's horizontal structure and vertical structure. And they tested using remote sensing and then the ground-based data what aspect of structure was most predictive of the richness of bird species, different species. And they developed really an excellent model and used it to accurately predict the level of abundance of different species types of birds across these domains in the Northeast. So this model, again, can be tested across the rest of the US because of the interoperability of these data. And I should also say that the bird count data came from Neon as well, because that's one of our on-the-ground data types. Natural disasters at Neon are research opportunities for scientists. So we won't talk about the maintenance and other things that has to happen when hurricanes and wildfires and all that sort of stuff comes through. But as natural disturbances are accelerated through climate warming, opportunities may knock twice or more to provide the chance for researchers to study these natural experiments. So again, these aren't ideal for the observatory, but the observatory is built for resilience. So these researchers used hurricane damage at a Neon site, and this is before and this is after, and you can see the shape of the curve is different. They used remote sensing data before and after, in combination with CO2 flux, so up in the towers where you were, all that CO2 flux data, and they found that there was a rapid acceleration of senescence in the forest because of the hurricane, and they found through this modeling that forest structure is the primary driver of recovery. And so they feel that this model can be used for post-disaster forest management because we know how to mitigate these kinds of forests after hurricanes. The last example is from Neon soil. So I know there are soil people out there. Soil is alive. A tiny bit of soil contains hundreds of different types of bacteria and fungi. It has a microbiome that's almost like the dark matter of the universe in terms of our level of understanding. And the soil is being studied because Neon is collecting these different soil types across our sites. So we collected from sites at the onset of operations, and these are desirable samples because the genomic data are associated. So these investigators on the left use over 1,000 soil samples from 12 domains, and they collected their infrared spectra, so that's something that you do with the soil samples. And they built a model, and they felt that their model was so accurate based on these data and validating it with the Neon data that it could be applied globally. And so that's exactly what they're doing now. So again, another example of using Neon data, and maybe in an unexpected way. And then on the right, these other authors wanted to predict the composition of the soil microbiome. So you're hearing the word prediction from me a lot, because that's what it's about. We want to understand the Earth, predict what's going to happen, and then mitigate it. So they use Neon soil microbe genomic data from 12 domains, this group did, and built and trained models and validated them using the soil data, and then predicted the kind of function of these microbial communities that lived there and a scaling effect that was associated, and had some surprising results according to the soil communities. So I guess this is sort of my last example. There's a nice community out there. The Ecological Forecasting Initiative is a research coordination network, meaning like a little community of scientists who are using NEON data to try to forecast ecology like the weather. And one of the cool things that they've done recently is they've had a data challenge. So this is pretty unique in the these biological disciplines, using these different data types that we've collected and setting up challenges and positioning the community to try to address them. So it's a little competition, data competitions. So this slide could have been called Neon for Hire, or Call Us, and I ended up with Neon Plus for the community, because Neon is there to support researchers. So aside from the open data and samples, we have staff, we have these platforms. So you know we have the plane, we have the towers, we have people. And if you're writing a proposal and you want to collect data outside of a Neon domain, or you want to collect other types of data in a Neon domain, if it doesn't interfere with the other data collection, we will definitely, and no one has proposed anything yet that would have, we're there to help you. So this is probably the most heavily used part of NEON at this point. The number of people who contacted us last year doubled. People want to hang their sensors on our towers. They really want to use our staff to collect their data. We want our staff to do that. We'll just hire more, right? They want to fly the airborne platform over the MBL to collect some data. So I made that up. Maybe you don't. But basically, there's all sorts of stuff that we can do for you. And this is something, obviously, that our scientists at NEON really enjoy. And it looks like the investigators who interact with us really enjoy interacting with us, too. So it's pretty fun. One example, so these are a picture right here. This little truck-like box thing is called a mobile deployment platform, which is not a great name, but it's basically a little NEON site in a box. It's got all the sensors that normal NEON towers do. And so yeah, they're fully instrumented but mobile. They have everything the towers do, like eddy covariance apparatus, phenocams, et cetera. They can be deployed rapidly, so that was the first vision, is that there's going to be something happening, or something did happen. You just want to get some NEON data somewhere where there's not a NEON tower. You want to get a rapid response. So we've had interest in these recently, and deployed one at Ohio State University last month, where an MDP is being used as a proof of concept testbed for some AI reasoning. And we are, excitingly, scheduled to deploy another MDP next week in Colorado for some researchers who got a rapid award from NSF, and they want to use the predicted high severity fires in Colorado this year. So this is not great for me because I live in Colorado, but as an opportunity to research the effects on soil microbiome and ecosystem function. But excitingly, these researchers are going to hang on our towers some technology that's really probably the next generation technology for all of us. They're going to couple the MDP with state-of-the-art edge computing devices. So they're going to deploy edge-enabled thermal imaging cameras to scan the sky. And because they're basically computing using machine learning at the same time as they're sensing, so not sending their data to the server anywhere, they're computing right there. If the camera sees something anomalous, right, if the machine learning algorithm says something weird's on the horizon, like a puff of smoke, other sensors can be responsive. So you can set these up in a logical fashion, so these trigger other things. So this is going to trigger increased data collection of other things. And in this case, soil temperature will be measured, and it will target manual sampling to people. So it's pretty exciting because they're able to test the use of NEON data but not disrupt the NEON data flows, and bringing in some really important data for soil microbiome folks. And we think the edge systems using machine learning methods will be a technology for the future, so we're super excited about it. So in some ways, this program where people are hanging new sensors off our tower is sent on their monarch butterflies and all of these cool ARUs, recording devices for birds and insects. It's just a way for us to look forward and say, what is the direction of scientific change by the community, and in what direction do we need to think to enable the community? Because this is not a static platform, despite the fact that it is standardized. Okay, so this slide, there's so much to say about engagement, because Neon is an observatory, it's a facility, and it's there for people to use. So this past year has brought into extremely sharp focus the inequities that exist, not only in society, but all over science. And as an awardee of the NSF, and as a human being, we care not only for the potential of Neon to advance knowledge, but also that Neon benefits society, and that it has broader impacts. So we do workshops on demand. We do workshops that are scheduled at major meetings or part of data help desks. We have domain engagement programs with the American Geophysical Union. We have all kinds of internal and external outreach to HBCUs, TCIs, et cetera, and are very, very committed to making sure that we have a fully engaged and very diverse community, because we do feel strongly that this is where the innovations will come into Neon from, is a committed, knowledgeable, diverse community. Okay, so in conclusion, to save the planet, we need to understand it. Neon is part of the big data revolution in ecology, and our data are free and open and standardized across platforms. So we're just at the beginning, we're just scratching the surface of the technology, of the data types, the communities, and the analyses. So many things that'll bring these data together to protect biodiversity. And in this era of rapid and broad-scale environmental change, we're really eager to help people to use the Neon Observatory and its data samples and knowledgeable staff. So please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. And there are also, of course, ways to contact Neon on with the website as well if you forget my name. So thank you. Take questions. Happy to take questions.
All right, our director, Neopamito.
So Paula, how big is a Neon site? So you talked about these locations, and you said, you've got the flex towers and things like that. But how big an area do you try to collect data from at one of these sites?
So that's a great question. So the first Neon site that I visited was actually with Linda Hyman when we were at NSF and Neon was under construction. And then my dream when I became the Neon chief scientist and observatory director was that I would go out and visit. And so someone asked me that question 2 months ago and I couldn't answer. And then I visited Domain 9 in North Dakota and I found out 5 acres. But some of them are bigger. So there's a lot of variation. But at least that grounded me. And they're scattered very often. But yeah, it's quite big. Yeah.
There are a couple questions with that. You're talking about standardization. The towers for an eddy flux tower typically have to be a certain height above the canopy, but a forest canopy is so much higher than a grassland canopy, so that the footprint of the tower are very different. How do you overcome that difference in just the footprint of things that you want to compare?
So that tower requirement is a technical one that I believe was best practice by the communities who measure flux. So that is, a particular height above the tallest vegetation is what is standardized. So this is not a data type that I'm intimately familiar with in terms of the specific requirements. I'm looking at Anne there, who I think knows. So I think that it is standardized with respect to vegetation height. I think that is the answer. and that is the best practice of that community. And so if the forest grows, the tower has to be made higher to stay a standard height above the canopy height. So we are already having that happen at a couple of sites. We've brought that to our advisory committee. We have our EdiFlex experts looking at that. So basically, yeah, raising the tower or trimming the trees, which is not okay because we are measuring, natural environments that we don't want to tamper with.
So then you
Does that help?
down standardize it to a per square meter or per hectare basis.
Yeah, so if you have other questions about that, follow up with me and I can get you to the right flux expert.
Do you know off the top of your head how many of the automated data streams are coming in from Neon? And is it 10? You have water and CO2 and greenness and probably a number of spectral images.
From the tower?
From the towers, yeah.
I think it's 43 sensors on the MDP towers, and I think it's 57 on the non-relocatable, meaning all the other towers.
Yep.
But in terms of how many data streams that is, it could be more.
And so they standardize to every half hour,
Yeah, typically 1/2 hour.
Right.
Yeah, that's typical. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that Neon is doing is looking at scale. And is there a sense that processes are accelerating? And regardless of whether or not they are or are not, what's the process for deciding or determining how to mitigate at scale? You're trying to effect or reverse certain changes.
Boy, that seems like a research question, actually. So I think the first question is, what do these processes look like at different scales? So we've had a lot of local, excellent ecology, and we understand what's happening at regional scales. What does it look like at a continental scale is exactly what Neon is positioned to address. In terms of processes that are happening at scale and how you mitigate them, I guess it really depends on what the variables are that are causative. So I think that's as far as I can go. It's one that requires some innovation. Things pop to mind. But I don't know, when you think about the mitigation ideas that people have of, seeding the clouds or making things a little bit more opaque here and there, it's unclear what that would do at a global scale or continental scale or global scale.
Thank you. I bet you have a bit of a bottleneck in collecting these terabytes of data with respect to biodiversity, beetles, stream invertebrates, and so on. It will take a lot of field scientists to create a terabyte of that. Is there any effort to create machine learning-based identification of organisms?
Yes, so we have researchers who are doing that. So I know that there are several at Kansas who are working on machine learning for beetle identification. And I actually think that there are a lot of research efforts focused on species identification, certainly in the botanical area. So that is definitely something that we're going to want to look at as soon as we can. So right now, machine learning is sort of itself bottlenecked up by the need for so many training images. And that's tough in a lot of aspects of biodiversity. So Neon is identifying the beetles, these carabid ground beetles, to the level of species. And for most of those species, there aren't images available in the hundreds for machine learning. But I would think over time that would actually happen naturally and hopefully very quickly with all the attention that we're putting nationally on machine learning. So, this is something that almost every collection, any big collections around the world are deeply engaged in, getting these machine learning pipelines set up for species identification. So we are definitely keeping our eye on it, keeping our eye on that emerging technology, trying to make the operations efficient anywhere we can. So it's still not ready for prime time, unfortunately, but definitely keeping our eye on it.
So you talked a lot about sort of the diversity of ecosystems that we have here in the US. But I was curious about, like, obviously that still doesn't represent like the diversity of ecosystems worldwide. And so especially for some of those more equatorial areas, like, are you guys thinking about like working with people either with countries there or who are studying there to sort of bring this also to those regions so that we can get a more global picture instead of just a continental picture?
Yes, it's just super important to be networked globally. So we have an MOU in place with a number of other environmental research infrastructures. For example, SEAON, which is a South African environmental observation network in South Africa, TURN in Australia, some similar ones in Europe, China. So we have those agreements in place, and then the question is, well, how are the data looking across them? How are data standardized? Or interoperable? How can we make them interoperable as quickly as possible? And so we are early. Neon is it's far ahead. So first of all, the Neon data are much more diverse than any of the other environmental research infrastructures, primarily because of our field-based data, because it's kind of a crazy thing to do, right? It's a lot of work to collect those data, and it's an amazing amount of scheduling and coordination. It's pretty incredible. So no other countries are doing that. The sensor networks probably stand the best chance of being globally networked first, and certainly the flux towers are already. So I mentioned that network. But this other network is called GERI, Global Environmental Research Infrastructure, and it's again something that we are definitely very interested in moving forward with.
Is there an oceanic network that's, or networks that are equivalent to your terrestrial ecological observational network?
Well, the Ocean Observing Initiative, which is based at Woods Hole, it's one of the, I think that's the lead. So John Trowbridge is the PI, and I talked with him a couple days ago. So I think we definitely have a lot of interest in getting our communities together. The question is, what are the critical questions? And there are many right at the interface of the land, fresh water, and the ocean, the coastal environment that could be well served by putting the data from these networks together. It hasn't been done, to my knowledge. The NSF is going to fund a Center for Environmental Synthesis called the Open Environmental Data Synthesis Center, which will have 10 years of work in working with the community and people bring questions to them, and hopefully questions like that will come up. But we're also very interested in the community just proposing workshops and bringing people together. So if anyone out there is interested in that, I'm interested in that.
So I think we have time for one more from online, which I just had a heads up on, which is great because it kind of looks to the future, which is what this is all about. So we'll end with an audience member from online.
These data streams are a tremendous opportunity both for researchers and for students. Are there online Neon resources targeted for facilitating use of these data specifically by students, for example, in ecosystems, ecology, restoration, or conservation biology courses?
Great question. Okay, so we have 111 tutorials online to teach on how to use, so first of all, very basic data skills connected broadly to environmental data, but also then many, many others specifically for how to use Neon data of different types. And so all of those tutorials are completely updated and ready to go. So that's one thing. Nothing relating to the application to areas like restoration, and I forgot the other area, but we are also part of the CUBES network and other networks that in the ARIN network, I'm forgetting what the acronyms are, but we work with other networks to link these learning materials. So particularly because of COVID, we all made a lot of videos that are useful in classes across the country. So if you send me an email, whoever you are, I can send you the link. So we have a whole page of educational resources.
Awesome. Well, let's thank Dr. Mabee one more time.
Thank you.